I keep retirement accounts everywhere. That's good, right? I don't keep all my eggs in one basket.
That logic makes sense until you actually have to manage it in retirement. Hi, I'm Philip Smith, financial planner with Tidepool Wealth Strategies, helping you figure out how to retire with confidence when you're nearing retirement and helping you build a plan that adapts as life changes when you're already retired. Welcome to
The Perfect Retirement Plan?
The title of this episode is, What Do I Do with All These Retirement Accounts? And if you've had a long career, this question almost always shows up eventually. It usually doesn't come from panic. It comes from a quiet realization that what started as a few simple retirement accounts has slowly turned into a collection of accounts. Old 401ks from previous employers, maybe a 403b from a nonprofit job years ago, one or two IRAs opened at different points in life, a Roth account somewhere in the mix, maybe something that you inherited. Nothing necessarily went wrong. Life just happened and continues to happen. And at some point, people stop asking, am I saving enough? And start asking questions like, do I even understand what I've built here? That's usually when this question comes out loud. What do I actually do with all of these retirement accounts, Philip? This is one of those conversations I love having with clients, not because consolidation itself is exciting, but because once the fog lifts, everything else gets easier. And I know you've heard me talk about it before, but I absolutely love bringing clarity to people's lives. Here's how we'll walk through this together. First, we'll talk about why this question is so common and why it's not a failure or a mistake. Then I'll share a couple of real-life examples that show how quickly retirement accounts can multiply. After that, we'll talk about where too many accounts start to create real problems, especially around required withdrawals, beneficiaries, and of course, taxes. And finally, we'll talk about what simplification actually means and why fewer accounts isn't necessarily the goal. Clear, intentional structure is the goal. Modern careers almost guarantee this situation. People change jobs more often than they used to. Employers merge, plans change custodians. Automatic enrollment becomes the default. And in the natural instinct to avoid paperwork and the fear of making a wrong move, it's easy to see how accounts can pile up over time. This isn't rare, it's normal. There are literally billions of dollars left behind in previous employer plans every year. Fidelity, Vanguard, and even government studies have pointed out how many Americans have stranded or forgotten retirement accounts simply because careers last longer and move more than they used to. The issue isn't that people have too many accounts. The issue is that no one ever helps them step back and look at the whole picture. I worked with someone getting ready to retire who had retirement plan accounts with 5 previous employers. 5. Nothing about that was irresponsible. Each job came with a retirement plan, and they participated in that plan, and that is fantastic. And each plan was left behind when life and their career moved on. But when we laid everything out, it became clear how much complexity was hiding underneath all of this. Different custodians, different investment menus, different beneficiary forms, different rules required for withdrawals, different processes just for making the move out of that old employer plan or old account into a new account. Their concern wasn't performance. It was this:
I just don't want to miss something important.
And that's a very reasonable concern. So I had another couple came in with a total of 22 accounts between the two of them. Multiple IRAs, old annuities, a couple 403bs, a mix of taxable and retirement accounts. When we asked whether they wanted to simplify how beneficiaries would eventually receive these assets, their answer was immediate. Yes, absolutely. Why haven't we talked about this sooner? We helped them consolidate down from 22 to 7 total accounts. Not because 7 is a magic number, but because clarity matters, and ultimately, not everything made sense to bring together into as few as possible accounts as possible. Once they could actually see the structure, the anxiety dropped. That's not about optimization, that's about good stewardship. There's also something else happening there that's harder to quantify, but incredibly important. Cognitive load. When accounts are scattered, people are carrying a mental checklist all the time. Which account is where? Which one needs attention in the near term? Which one has beneficiaries that have been updated? Which ones don't? Which one is required withdrawals coming up? Consolidation is going to reduce all of that background noise, or at least some of that background noise. Fewer accounts mean fewer things to track, fewer statements to reconcile, and fewer chances for something important to slip through the cracks. What replaces the noise is a sense of cohesion, hopefully. Everything starts to work together instead of feeling like a collection of somewhat unrelated parts. Now, before we go further, there's another personality I want to acknowledge because I see this probably more often than you might think. This is the person who hears the phrase, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket," and takes it very literally and applies it to a lot of different aspects of their life. They'll say things like, "I like having accounts at different banks. I don't want all my money to be with one custodian." Or, "What if one of these financial institutions fails? I don't want my money to be there," or at least not all of it. That instinct doesn't come from paranoia. It usually comes from some lived experience or headlines in the news or just a healthy desire to be careful. But here's where the misunderstanding sneaks in. Diversification is about how your money is invested, not how many statements show up in your mailbox from different custodians and financial institutions. Having 3 bank accounts in 3 different states doesn't actually reduce investment risk. And depending on account balances and financial institutions used, may have no meaningful impact on reducing financial risk. Using multiple custodians, quote unquote, just in case, often increases complexity without meaningfully increasing protection. In most cases, the real safeguards are built into the system itself: account registration, custody rules, and protections that don't improve simply because accounts are scattered across different places. So while spreading money across institutions can feel safer, it often trades perceived safety for some real-world confusion. And that confusion tends to show up later, right when clarity matters most. Multiple accounts increase the chances of missed details, and in retirement, small details can carry pretty big consequences. Required minimum distributions, or RMDs, which I talk about all the time, are one of the biggest trouble spots. IRAs allow some aggregation. Employer plans usually do not. When accounts are scattered, it becomes much easier to miss a required withdrawal or miscalculate the actual amount that you need to take from all of the accounts combined or in total. Or you end up maybe taking it from the wrong place. The penalties for mistakes here can be pretty steep, and most of them are completely avoidable with better structure. Another common issue is beneficiaries. Different accounts often have different beneficiary forms or a different process for keeping track of beneficiaries. And when you filled out the forms at different times, sometimes over decades apart, it can potentially cause some issues. Estate attorneys regularly point out that beneficiary forms override wills and trusts. It's a common misconception that your will or trust will actually dictate what happens to money inside an IRA. More accounts mean more chances that something may be outdated or simply inconsistent. And this is where simplification becomes an act of care for the people you'll eventually leave behind. It happens to all of us. Because from the other side of this, I can tell you this quite plainly. 22 accounts split among 3 beneficiaries equals an absolute nightmare scenario. It's not just for the heirs, but for the trustees, the executors, and the financial advisors who are trying to help a family through a difficult season. 22 split 3 ways, that's 66 total accounts that have to be created. It's madness. More accounts mean more paperwork, more timelines, more chances for delays, and more opportunities for mistakes or misunderstandings. When legacy planning is clean and cohesive, it's not just easier administratively, it's kinder to the ones you are leaving something to. It allows people to focus on grieving and healing instead of tracking down accounts and getting signatures and trying to complete the paperwork correctly. When retirement accounts are spread everywhere, tax planning is another area of increased difficulty. It can become more difficult to coordinate withdrawals and manage tax brackets or decide where Roth conversions may or may not make sense. Sometimes people don't want more strategy. They want just fewer surprises. Let's also talk about the subject of simplification. This is important to say out loud. Simplification does not mean everything goes into one account or as few accounts as humanly possible or financially possible or registrationally possible. Some plans may have unique features worth keeping. Some accounts are better left alone. The mistake isn't complexity itself. The mistake is unintentional complexity. So when we help clients think about consolidation, we try to start with purpose. What is each account for? What role does it play now and in the future? What problem would it create if it stayed exactly where it is? This is also where I like to slow people down and try to set some expectations, because consolidation is work. It is not just going to magically happen. It's not hard work, but it is detailed work. There are old statements to track down, beneficiary forms to review, cost bases to verify, employer plans that require phone calls, signatures, follow-up. I tell people all the time, every retirement plan is a little bit different as far as their process for distributions, withdrawals, and transferring accounts. And here's an important distinction. Doing this cleanup gradually along the way is almost always easier than trying to fix everything at once at the very end of a career, or worse, early or in the middle of retirement. When consolidation happens earlier, people are sharper. Paperwork is easier to find. Decisions feel less urgent. There's room to be thoughtful instead of feeling reactive. When it gets pushed off too long, the work doesn't disappear. It just shows up later in life, maybe under some additional pressure, maybe under new circumstances, sometimes at the same time as income decisions, tax planning, and healthcare transitions. Quite frankly, this is why some people hire our office. They don't want fewer accounts just for the sake of it. They want a steady hand helping them do the cleanup gradually, correctly, and with intention and a plan. This isn't about doing more. It's about doing what actually matters at a pace that respects where someone is at in life. So let's take some action on this. First, try making a list of every retirement account you have, even the small ones. Second, check the beneficiaries on each of your accounts. So far, we're not even doing any work to consolidate or anything like that. We're just making sure we know where everything is at and who it will get left to if we're gone. Now, third, ask whether each account still serves a purpose that is not served by the other accounts, or if the separate accounts simply exist out of habit, maybe a bad habit, or to say it more plainly, maybe out of a little bit of negligence. If the list feels overwhelming, that is information, and that information is a starting point. You didn't end up with all these accounts because you did something wrong. You ended up here because life happened, and quite honestly, by setting up all these retirement accounts with different employers or different custodians, you actually did something right. You tried to keep your retirement savings growing. So the goal now, it's not perfection, it's clarity. If this episode was helpful or inspiring in any way to get you motivated to take some action, please feel free to subscribe and share it with someone who's close to retirement. And remember, it's not about having the smartest financial advisor, the most money saved, or the highest probability of retirement success, or leaving a scavenger hunt behind for your loved ones. The perfect retirement plan for you is the one you act on.
It's disclosure time. This podcast is intended for educational purposes only, should not be used for any other purposes. The views depicted in this material should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual, are not intended to be financial, tax, or legal advice, and are not representative of Type Wealth Strategies or Cetera Wealth Services, LLC. All examples are hypothetical in nature and for illustrative purposes only. The opinions contained in this material are those of Philip Smith and not a recommendation or solicitation to buy or sell investment products. This information is from sources believed to be reliable, but Cetera Wealth Services, LLC cannot guarantee or represent that it is accurate or complete. For a comprehensive review of your personal situation, always consult with a financial, tax, or legal advisor. Neither Cetera nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice. Our office address is 450 Country Club Road, Suite 350, Eugene, Oregon 97401. Securities offered through Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory service offered through Cetera Investment Advisors, LLC, registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership for any other named entity.